Hello and welcome to another episode of PPC Town Hall. My name is Fred Valles. I'm your host and I'm also the CEO and co-founder at Optmyzr. So we wanted to do a session that's very tactical and practical, again, with lots of advice. So this week, we're going to talk about attribution measurement, Google Analytics for attribution models. Basically answering the question of, you're doing PPC, you're spending the money, but how do you measure whether it's working? And do you measure that just through the ad engine, directly using Google's conversion tracking? Or do you want to take more of a cross-channel approach and measure everything so you see how your potential customers move between Facebook, social, search, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and all of the hundreds of places that consumers hang out these days? So to help us with that, we have a great set of panelists. All of them are first-timers on PPC Town Hall. So when we welcome them in just a minute, use the chat and comment section to put in where you're coming in from. We are live, so excuse the bloopers that we might have along the way, but it also means you can ask live questions, and the panelists will see those, and we'll try to do our best to answer them. So welcome to the next episode of PPC Town Hall. All right, and my guests this week are Christopher or Chris Gutknecht from Germany, right?
Yes, hi.
How are you doing? Where in Germany are you?
In Munich, actually.
In Munich. Are you stuck at home, or you guys get to go out yet?
Sort of more stuck at home, yeah.
More stuck at home.
Can't travel to Austria yet.
Okay, and then we have Brooke Osmundson from up north.
Yes, hello from Minnesota. So the snow is melting finally.
Okay, welcome to the show. And Ken Williams from some basement somewhere.
Yeah, so technically I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, but actually 23andMe tells me that I'm 46% from Munich. So maybe a distant cousin of yours, Chris.
Yeah, very good, Chris. Are you on 23andMe? Maybe you are actually a cousin. Yeah. So quickly tell folks your background and expertise. So we'll start with Chris maybe, but what do you do professionally and what do you know about attribution and everything we're going to talk about today?
Sure, yeah, thanks. I started out in PPC 12 years ago, and I have a focus on e-commerce and retail for the past 8-9 years. I had a e-commerce agency role leading up to 2 years ago, and now I work in-house for Bergzeit. We are an online retailer for mountain gear. We're at the level about 125 million yearly revenue, so we're sort of kind of mid-size. And my team leads the acquisition, so performance marketing, the tech SEO, and the optimization tactics, which is data analytics, CRO. And that's why we've been working on attribution for the last year, I would say 12 months. And we've had a lot of struggles, and I could share a few of those.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about the struggles and especially the solutions you came up with, because I think we all have our struggles. Brooke, what about you? What's your background in this?
Awesome. So I work for NordicClick Interactive. We're an agency in Minnesota, and I serve as the Senior Director of Digital Strategy. So I work very closely with our clients from a day-to-day standpoint with overall business and client strategy, but then also heading up some of our agency strategy as well. So I've been in the paid media space for a little over 8 years now, about 4 with NordicClick in the agency. And previous to that, I actually worked in-house for an e-commerce company where I was in the kind of wedding space and Christmas card space, so very competitive. But the reason I've gotten so into attribution lately is because of COVID, and a lot of our B2B companies, we've had to shift a lot of what they're doing and seeing because just user behavior is shifting. And so really having those conversations, the hard conversations with, this is actually what we can see is happening. And so I've gotten more into the user behavior before they become a conversion. So that's where my expertise lie.
Nice. So measuring along the whole funnel.
Yes.
Love it. Let's talk about that too. Ken, what about you, your professional background?
Yeah, so I'm actually not from the paid media world exactly. I started at the American Cancer Society, and then hired a company called Search Discovery to help us with analytics. And at the time, they were building their own tag manager. I was kind of in the right place at the right time. So they sold that to Adobe. It became Adobe DTM. And I was an early user of that tool. So I've been at Search Discovery ever since. And I've been, deep into analytics implementations. At some point, I became the sort of Google architect. So I started to specialize in Google Analytics, Tag Manager, and Google Cloud Platform. Then most recently, when the new version of Google Analytics launched, I did the first implementation in November of 2019. So when it was still kind of an early beta, and had a lot of trouble with it. There's no documentation at the time. So I started writing articles for this internal wiki of how to use this product. And then when the pandemic hit, I turned them into a blog. And so I operate a blog that's really just all about Google Analytics for it's targeted to analysts, so people who are doing implementation or reporting mainly, which overlaps nicely with, paid media side. That's kind of my history, and it's a real treat to do this because usually my advice is unsolicited. I'm just saying my opinions, and so it's nice to have someone ask questions, and very validating.
Well, welcome to the show. You're all experts, so I hope we have a lot of questions from the audience, but we've got a number of topics lined up as well. And so for the audience, again, on YouTube, if you use the comment section, that's where you're telling us where you're from right now, but that's also going to be your place to ask questions. We got a few seconds delay here, so if we don't answer your question right away, don't be offended. We'll try our best to get to it. But, let's talk about challenges, right? And somebody was saying it here, like we've all had our struggles. I think, Chris, you actually wrote about 2 years ago that some of the struggles or the challenges that you saw was in terms of finding scalable and implementable solutions to do a number of things. One of them was about cross-channel or multi-channel attribution, cross-device tracking, offline touch points. You guys being very much into e-commerce, focusing on margins and returns. So talk a little bit about the challenges that, what's most top of mind for you today?
Well, we've been working on profit bidding and attribution for a year now, and they're both very challenging. We're still far behind where we would like to be, because the more you dig down into the rabbit hole, the more challenges you find. And you have to just make so many assumptions to go forward. Sorry?
Where would you like to be? Like, what's the end goal here? Or not the end goal, but what are you trying to achieve?
Oh, I could talk about where we are. So we've been working on attribution for a year now. We have tested 2 models, and we have one in production, which is a Markov chain model, which we calculate on a daily basis and then have fresh results for attributed channel weights. And
wait. Markov chain.
Markov chain.
Let's go there. I think, I think a lot of folks have heard about Markov and seen presentations about it, but refreshed our minds a little bit, like what is that, and why might you use something like that as opposed to the more common first click, last click, position-based, linear decay, and all of the ones Google gives us?
The rule-based, yeah. So I think most of us folks, we know all the rule-based models, and I think there are 2 popular data-driven models. One is Markov chains and one is Shapley values. And to put it simple, Markov chains is about the removal effect. So if you have 2 similar chains and you have 1 extra touch point, let's say PPC organic newsletter, and you have another one where you don't have a newsletter interaction, you want to look at that incremental effect in that position of newsletter. And then you aggregate it across all newsletter touch points to say, what is the incremental effect or the removal effect of having newsletter there? Does it increase the probability of a conversion? And And then we have the Shapley value, which is based on game theory, where we say, what is the average payout for this channel across all games? So our customer journey is a game. And every time a channel is involved and you have a payout, which would be revenue or a sale, that would be a contribution to a payout. And we have seen different results for the two models. And what we went with essentially was the Markov chain model, because it actually it helps upper funnel channels shine. And what we saw is especially the lower funnel channels like retargeting, affiliate, etc. They have higher payout values because they're very close to the sale. But we didn't want to build a attribution model that helps and pushes the lower funnel channels. We went the other way.
Interesting. And so, I mean, maybe to put that like in a different perspective a little bit, but so there's last click attribution, which is like that lower, the lower funnel that's getting all the credit, but that kills your upper funnel, especially in a world where a lot of bidding and decisions are made automatically by machine learning. If you don't value the upper funnel, then the system is going to discount that and not do anything with it. So I think what you're describing, you could also achieve in a rule-based model using more position-based. So that might be an entry-level point that people can easily use in Google Analytics. But I think what you're also referring to now is this is not just an in-channel measurement system. And let's actually talk about that, right? So you can do an attribution model within Google Ads, or you can do an attribution model that spans all of the touch points. And Ken or Brooke, like thoughts on that? Like, would you use both? Do you use one exclusively? What's the difference?
Yeah, and I'll let Ken speak to some of his other pieces. Since I'm not more so in the implementation space, I'll leave that to Chris and Ken. But in my opinion, especially if measuring different attribution models is new to you, 100% start doing them in both, like if you have them built in Google Ads or Google Analytics, if you're trying to find other tools, I would start running them against each other to really understand the different touch points and what's going to work best for your business. So just to kind of piggyback off of what Chris was saying, these are the conversations we're having with our clients right now. I feel like we're a little bit behind as well, just in terms of even understanding what is happening lately, especially with user behavior shifting. We're seeing, users take longer and more touch points to make a decision. And so trying to find a model that doesn't kill your upper funnel, I think, is extremely important. And at the end of the day, you have to find one that makes sense for your business. So whether that is using, ones that are already built in the platforms versus trying to build your own custom one with other systems, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, the thing that I would add as well is that we're working with pretty imperfect data. And, I think that being comfortable acknowledging that and thinking through the implications of different models and finding a best fit, it's a business challenge, it's a marketing challenge. It takes a little bit of education, because we have to start with what are the questions that the business needs to answer, and then what's our business model? How do people interact with us? And there's no perfect fit, so there's going to be a best choice for your customer experience. And so you just kind of need to think through what your options are. And the other thing I would reinforce Brooke's point about testing. I think experimentation is really important. The thing that I've found to be actually the biggest challenge is buy-in more than anything, especially at larger organizations where there's just a lot of people who sit around the table every month and look at the results and that kind of thing. Coming up with, choosing something that everyone agrees on, this is the way we're going to think about attribution. Start there, choose something, and try and get everyone on the same page. To me, that's almost the biggest challenge, more so than deciding the right approach.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear what the others think as well. And Brooke, you sort of said, like, you got to find a model that works best for your business. But that's like always that what does that mean? What's best for your business, right? Is the business the agency, and are you trying to prove that the agency is like getting you the cheapest clicks in the channel it manages, or are we truly talking about what moves the needle on revenue and profits?
Yeah, I would definitely say the latter, because what we see is, so our clients are primarily in the B2B space right now. And, we are trying to focus more on branding efforts and really expanding our footprint. Because if you are just focused on mid to lower funnel, that pool of people is going to get smaller and smaller every single month, every single year. So when we are doing different channels from a paid media, so whether it's LinkedIn or Google, Twitter, you name it, a lot of it is going to start up here when they're just researching. And so before we pick a model that is best for that business, we're looking at how does each channel contribute to an overall conversion or a sale. So that's what I mean in terms of picking one that's best for your business. I know some companies or clients that I've talked to will just say, we want to pick the one that gives marketing the most credit. Well, of course you do, because marketing dollars are the first to go in tough times. But sometimes you have to look at the data to understand how is it contributing and what other efforts are you doing outside of marketing that's going to make the most sense for your business.
Maybe
Yeah.
I could add that. Oh, sorry.
No, let's get the in-house perspective on that.
Yeah. So the analogy I've been using for half a year now is the football analogy. So if you put up a team, you can't just put offense. You need the entire team, and it has to be well put together. And even though if the offense people scoring the goals, you need a defense as well. And so you need this entire set of different experts contributing. Mm-hmm. And that works well to understand, okay, we don't only need retargeting, we also need content, branding, etc. Mm-hmm. And then what we figured out is that we have areas where we as a company want to invest, which is content, product content, editorial content. And we actually geared our decision towards which model can help justify the invest in content, but also steer it in the right way. Markov model worked well for us to show, for instance, we had 1%, we have a blog, and this blog had 1% revenue share last click, and it increased to 5%, which is a 400% increase. And that was a nice story to tell. Actually, PPC lost about 9%, but newsletter lost as well. So these were stories we had to sort of put into one big picture. But we now have something that is not based on, let's say, purely on heuristics. It's based on an algorithmic model, and then we can just take out let's say, the politics in a sense. Another thing I'd want to mention, because you asked, looking within a platform or cross-channel, our experience was that you have to get this cross-channel set up right before you go into one channel. Like, for instance, if you go into PPC and you do it on Gclid level, that's far more complex. I think you need to get the infrastructure right to distribute the values across channels, then have this structure really solid, and then you can go into channels. And until then, you could just have Google Ads do the job, send it the right conversion value, and then Google Ads can do the attribution within the different clicks concerning that sale.
So a question that's top of mind for me. So you went Markov model. It sounds in a way a bit similar to data-driven attribution from Google, where it's like the addition of one step in the chain, and how did that contribute to it? So why did you choose Markov versus the Google system, DDA?
We actually used Google. We tried Google's recommendation as well. So the underlying model of most of Google's products is Shapley, and they have open sourced it. It's called Attribution. I could share the link. And we worked on that with Google engineers and the Google team for about 3 months, and then we ran Markov Chains in parallel, looked at the results, and what we saw with Google's Attribution, that is very much overvalues those lower funnel channels.
Mhm.
Like we saw an increase for PPC, for affiliate, for retargeting, and actually a decreasing value for content and upper funnel. So that was our arbitrary decision to say, we want to invest in upper funnel, especially in content. So we went for Markov Chain.
And where can people learn more about how to set up the Markov? Is that through a piece of software? How do you get started with that?
Yeah, I could share the link. It's channelattribution.net. It's an open source package. It's it's one guy from England, one guy from Italy, and we're currently testing a pro package, which gives you back the attributed values on path or order level. So I can highly recommend that. It's free to use. There's a Python version, an R version. It works on analytics raw data. In our case, we use Universal Analytics 360. But I think you could tune the GA4 raw data and tie them into that package. So you could go both ways.
All right. Well, since you said GA4, let's talk about GA4. And Ken, you're the expert on that. Give people an introduction about what's new about it, what's interesting, why they should switch, or why they might want to wait and switch.
Yeah. So there's a lot that's new in GA4. I kind of, when I talk about it, I boil it down to 3 or 4 categories. One of them is there's this new concept of an event-driven data model. So the data is just formatted a little bit differently. And the thing to know about that is that this is a structure that Firebase Analytics has used for years. Works very well with mobile apps, and so now web and mobile are sharing the same structure, and so there's a very nice sort of seamless integration. But even if you don't have a mobile app and you're web only, there's still really big benefits to you of this approach. One of them is the way that we measure engagement has changed quite a bit. So if you think about, what you've seen in Universal Analytics, you pull up the home page, all of the key metrics that we tend to share are session-based. And many of them, if someone says, how much traffic did we get through, an email campaign, usually the answer is given in sessions. And if you want to describe, are these people, are they high quality visitors? The answer to that's usually given in bounce rate, pages per session, average time on site. So those are all session-based metrics. And with the event-driven data model, a new feature was rolled out called engagement time. And engagement time solves a couple of problems that we had with older versions of analytics. So the short definition of it on a website, there's a kind of a timer running when your tab is active on a site, and that amount of time you're actively viewing a page is sent to GA4 periodically. On a mobile app, it's looking at the time that the app was in the foreground. So it's treating it in a very similar way across devices, which is nice because engagement metrics for web have always struggled to make sense on a mobile app. And what you can do with that is you can say that I'm a news site and I publish articles. Somebody might do a Google search, land on a page, spend 5 minutes reading an article and leave. And that's a successful visit to my business. But in the old version of Google Analytics, it was a bounce. The time on site was, the average session duration was 0 because the way that's calculated, it didn't know that you were there that long. 1 page. So it looks very negative. Engagement time kind of removes that. And this is useful for certain industries. It's extremely useful for web and mobile applications where the traditional concept of I land on a page and I move to another page and move to another page has just changed in recent years. So that's not how people use the internet anymore, at least not to the extent that it used to be. So GA4 handles this a lot better. And this is all thanks to this sort of event-driven data model. So, you asked what are the big things. I would say all that's kind of number one. It's all sort of tied up in this new way of thinking about how we describe what users are doing. But there are others. There's a lot of things that have been released and that are coming soon to prepare us for a cookieless future or a strict limitation on cookies, and we can talk a lot about that. And the other sort of big category is that GA4 is built on top of the global site tag, which basically the thing that is useful about that is you can make changes in the user interface that actually modify the code on your site without needing a change in the tag manager. So anyway, those are all big topics. We can dive into any of them if you want to go deeper, but those I would say are kind of the big takeaways for GA4.
Yeah, so let's, you actually transition us nicely into some user questions. So with the tracking cookie fading out, and this is for anyone, but what do you think are the challenges? And more importantly, what sort of solutions are we starting to think about?
I'll try to say that I think this fading out idea is hard to predict if you want to set up some infrastructure. And I think what we work on right now is like little steps from the things that are already hurting us. So for instance, Safari's ITP 2.1 is killing first-party cookies after 7 days, but they don't kill or respect server-side cookies. The one thing you could do to improve quality right now, because you don't know what the future is going to bring, you could transition to server-side cookies. You could either do the cookie rewrite service, or you could go to server-side tag manager, which has a built-in functionality. That could be a first step. I actually don't have a good answer for everything coming with iOS 14. I have looked into it enough to understand what we should do right now. So my recommendation would be right now to focus on server-side cookies, because that's something that Safari respect. And for me, it's just too mind-boggling to say we can go completely cookieless, because that would involve that we have to force users to log in every time to get the state from the server. So maybe you have a better vision, a clearer vision of the future. Or Brooke, sorry.
No, Ken, you go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I'd say I have a clearer vision. I will affirm, your recommendation around server-side cookies. This is something we are doing with some of our clients. And the concept here, I guess, just if this is unfamiliar to anyone watching this, is there's been two things that are privacy related that we have to respond to. One of them is regulatory, and we've been dealing with GDPR for a while, and CCPA is new in the US. There's also, though, a lot of momentum from really popular browsers. Safari is the biggest, Firefox as well, to restrict cookies. The vision that both Apple and Mozilla have put out is that they're trying to get away from the ability of companies like Facebook to monitor you across domains. So to be able to identify who you are when you're in a not logged in state and collect that information. And I don't think that the objective of those companies is to harm what we're doing. And actually, there's been quite a bit of work done from the WebKit team to figure out how can we preserve attribution while sort of stomping on something that people are building a general consensus around that they're not comfortable with, which is that personal information being collected by a company. So, what we know is, right now, most people are probably more impacted by Apple's changes than they realize. As of last November, the cookies that are set by even first party on your browser by Google Analytics are limited to 7 days. So those users who are visiting the site on an iPhone or an Apple computer, and they have a longer than 7 day gap between sessions, are going to look like a new user when they come back. So that's kind of the practical impact. I think that the solutions, that's the dark side. I think that the solutions come in a couple of different categories as well. So the thing you can do right now, if you have the ability, is write your servers from a cookie. That's not easy. And there's just like, you have to involve people with development skills to help you do that are not normally marketers. So there's a bit of a challenge there. The other things, so there's a couple things coming in GA4 that help address this that I'll kind of throw out there, but I think there's actually a better solution that I'll throw out as well that's separate from GA4. So with the GA4 world, there are two big announcements that they've made recently. One, and by the way, I don't work for Google. I'm reading these with you guys, and I don't have deeper insight. Neither of these are live yet. One of them, though, is this concept of reporting identity being linked to Google Signals. So if you are logged into your Google account and you have opted into ads personalization, if I go to NewYorkTimes.com, I might not be logged in, but Google knows who I am. And so that identifier, it's been announced, is going to roll out as something that we can use with Google Analytics to recognize users. The impact of sort of removing third-party cookies on Google Signals is unclear. Since Google owns Chrome, and Chrome has a massive market share, something like 60%, they've got a lot of flexibility to make that survive what's coming, but we don't know. We'll see. And they're actually pretty open with what they're working on. There's something called Privacy Sandbox that anyone can take a look at. The other thing, GA4 related, is conversion modeling. So that is where, we know that there are people, like in the Safari example I gave, more than 7 days pass between sessions, you look like a new user. That sort of, you could think of it as it creates a gap in our data. And we know where those gaps are. And so Google is working on something that will use machine learning to help fill those gaps, which I think is really important, because these are gaps in our data now that most analysts don't have any idea they're not accounting for. It's really complicated to look at your traffic and say, based on what Apple has done and what Mozilla has done, I'm gonna modify my reports to the stakeholders I have. It's too complicated for anyone to do. So that needs to come from the product. And so that's what conversion modeling is attempting to do. This is something that's been written about. We have not seen it yet, and I'm hopeful that it will be, a bit of a step forward in this. And then, so those are the two Google solutions. I think I'll just sort of I don't talk a lot about it, but I think actually the real solution that's going to have the bigger impact is that we're probably going to all need to get better at running field tests and experiments, because this is a skill set that some of us have probably done when we've said, I'm going to just shut off advertising in a geography and run it in another one and compare the difference. I think that kind of experimentation is going to become really important for people in paid media.
There's a lot there, Ken.
I talked for a long time.
Let's talk for a long time, because I think this is fascinating, and it feels like we need to have three more hours of sessions on all the things that you just said. So we'll unpack a lot of that in just a minute, but there's another question. I want to direct this one at Brooke. So are there other platforms besides GA that you like using? Mixpanel comes up as an example. And how do you measure the views as opposed to the clicks in some of the software? And do the views matter to you?
Got it. Okay, so to unpack the first question of what other platforms. So in all transparency, we're using Google Analytics now for the majority of our clients. One being, we work from anywhere, mainly B2B clients where they might be smaller, but all the way up to enterprise. But kind of piggybacking off of what Ken had said at the beginning of the talk is, even just getting that buy-in from clients to look at attribution in a different way is becoming more and more challenging. Even with the data that we're bringing, I think a lot of the challenge is how do you speak to it in a way that they're going to understand. So to even say we would want to go towards this model, but then looking at other softwares. So there's a couple that I'm looking into just from an agency side, so we can kind of bring these ideas to our clients. I would probably defer to Ken or Chris for their recommendations for other platforms. But there's a couple that I am looking into, one being Mixpanel, one I was looking into Funnel like just the other day. But there's so many out there. And I just personally would need to like slice and dice the nuances of each to give a better answer to that. But the second question, how to see which channels help attribution with views but not clicks. I think this is dependent on which channel you're looking at. So if it's Google, if it's Facebook, if there's another channel that you're using from a paid media standpoint, that's where you might need to look, well, you probably will need to look at those in-platform analytics to understand how they are attributing, making sure that you're capturing that data from, like, they might not be clicking, but then they eventually come through as a conversion. So it gets kind of messy, to be honest, when you're looking at like GA holistically for each of your paid media channels, but that's only one piece that's looking at if they've even come to the website, but trying to piece that together with what you're seeing in platform. And it's not an easy solution right now because they're so fragmented. And so to be honest, that's just like a big challenge, but trying to make more generalized assumptions, which I think, is going to be some of the case when we're removing or, third-party cookies are going away. I know I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit, but we hear from clients, we want to know everything about our customers. Well, that's just not going to be possible. And so you might have to make more generalized assumptions. And I think this goes into if you have, branding pieces where the main goal is to engage with them and they may not click through right away. So you're looking both in platform and whether it's Google Analytics or your other system that you're looking at.
Right. So you're always going to have gaps in the data and you're not going to get the picture. But then, and this leads nicely into Derek's question. It's directed at Chris, but with these gaps in data, how do you fill them in? What do you do? How do you still make the right decisions?
Was it directed at me or?
Yeah, this question specifically the user. Derek says,
okay.
Attribution.
Maybe I could just add the last question. I've been following Snowplow for a while now. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Snowplow. They are basically GA4 or what GA4 and Serverside GTM wants to be. But if you want to implement Snowplow, you need a very sophisticated data analytics team. So you need a team of analysts writing SQL. And then you have on top a Snowflake or let's say a Looker, so really sophisticated data stack. And at the end of the day, you need raw data. You need to model your raw data to get sessions and to get channels, and then build the models on top of that. So yeah, you could do that with several tracking systems, but at the end of the day, it's very much a analytical, it's hard work.
Well, yeah, let's pause on that for a second. So as an organization, how much is invested in that? I mean, is that you? Is that a team of multiple people? Is that your full-time job? For people, did they want to solve these problems? But like, what's a realistic expectation on how big you have to be and how much money you have to invest to do it?
Well, if you want to build it ground up, I would say you at least need an analytics engineering team, probably full-time data analyst, like an experienced data analyst. And then that data analyst could do a bit of data science work if you have a package that you just consume, or if you want to build it ground up, then well, you need a data science team as well. Maybe to touch on, because you mentioned impression tracking or impression attribution, we had a few chats with travel companies, so large in-house teams with data science teams, and they said, don't do impression attribution modeling if you don't have to do it, because it's so complex. It's so much infrastructure you need. And we just shied away from it. We just tried to get the system. And can you just make the question pop up? Accurate data, yes. So cross-device, we haven't built it properly into a model yet. There's the option like universal analytics to pass on user ID information. But I think universal analytics is not an ideal solution to do cross-device tracking. GA4 is better. So the best thing you could do is look at cross-device signals, logins, and email opens, because from an email, you know it's a registered user. You could, if your email system could do that, you could tie in the information. Is that this user? Of course, you have to hash the information in some way. So these are the two signals I would use. And there are so many sources of incomplete data, and some are more problematic than others. For instance, we mentioned the Safari ITP problem, where 7 days after you appear as a new user. That's a big problem for attribution, right? In general, like cookie consent for me is not so much a big problem, because if you don't consent, if you don't agree on tracking, then you're just black, right? You don't have part of the journey, you just, the full journey is just missing. That's easier, in my opinion. And then hardening cookies to server-side, that is one helpful solution. And cross-device would be trying to use the cross-device signals, sending it on to Google Analytics as a user ID. And from that point on, stitching the sessions. So that's what Google Analytics doesn't offer. It doesn't offer the retroactive stitching like other tools do, like Snowplow or Segment. Well, that's just analytics. It tries to serve all purposes. It's not specifically good at user ID graphing. And so yeah, there are several sources of lacking data. You try to tackle them with the things you can do.
Ken or Brooke, any ways that you guys fill in the gaps?
I mean, honestly, like Chris had said, it's a lot of time and investment to even go down that route. I think that user stitching, or whether it's device ID attribution, will be a more long-term solution. But right now it's extremely complicated. And unless you have, like Chris had said, the infrastructure, whether in your team or you're at a very large agency where you do have that, those people in those roles, I would say that will be a long-term solution. But the fact of it is, like, many companies don't have those resources available. So it's in what we're seeing is just having the conversations with clients is you know what the data that you have available, and having those conversations and making it in a way that they can understand, here's what's happening. And in the short term, just being, I think Ken, you had said that, just being comfortable with some of those unknowns and having to sometimes be more generalized in your assumptions. But you might have to do some actual testing and see what works best. But until you have those resources or the dollars to invest in that, it's going to be a long time before your company can get to every single piece that you want to. It's just becoming more and more difficult.
You're muted, Ken.
Oh, Ken, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got noisy kids, so I keep doing that. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because early in my marketing career, I believed very strongly in this 360 idea of a customer that, because we've got all this digital data, we're going to get better and better at understanding all these touch points with our customers. And we'll eventually get to a point where we've got amazing data and we can know everything. And I feel like that is something that we're sort of having to give up as an industry. When Google released sampling, it made a lot of people really frustrated. I had a lot of clients that were like, these aren't real numbers. I want to know exactly what's happening. But the reality is we're solving business questions, and there are times, and there will be more times in the future, where looking at the real data is a bit less helpful than looking at data that's come through something like conversion modeling or sampling, and take advantage of these tools, that get us a more clear picture of what's happening. But at the end of the day, I think that this we're never going to fill all these data gaps, and we kind of have to get used to that and learn how to live with it a little bit.
Well, and I think there's also getting comfortable with the notion that there's no real answer to many of these things, but it's a directional answer. And so when I think about attribution models, it's like you get the question, what's the perfect attribution model for you? And it's like, well, there is no perfect, right? It's just about something. It's about a model that somehow correlates to the business goals that you're trying to achieve. And I think that's why, Ken, when you talked about doing the field test, like turn one market on and the other off, and then see what happens, right? What was the real bottom line impact? And don't get bogged down to the level of, well, what queries did I run for and with that? Mm-hmm. Because Google is taking away that data, and we just have to become a little bit more broad in our thinking. And go back to like what you said, which is what's the business trying to achieve, and it's not about every single customer. We need to be on them. We need to follow them, right?
Right. There's a couple of levels. I think of it as, if I am optimizing my search, I need certain information, and it might make the most sense for me to say, I'm going to turn on one of these. It probably does make the most sense. Let's say I'm going to turn on these attribution models. I'm going to use what they have to help me optimize my campaigns. And we've got to make these decisions about what's the best one for me. But if you're trying to answer a question of, we spent X amount of dollars, what was the return on that? That's something that I would say that's not a good use case for an attribution model. That's a use case of, we need to run an experiment, because we've got this, the results we have are a combination of what would have happened if we did nothing, plus our marketing efforts, plus some unknown noise and error that is word of mouth and the things that we just can't measure. And social scientists have been running experiments using, similar data for 100 years. And I think it's something we'll do more and more.
True that. There's a question here about Facebook attribution. I don't know if anyone has an opinion on this one.
Well, I think this kind of goes in parallel with one of the other questions, I think, about how do you deal with views but no clicks. So, and again, I don't know if that first question was around Facebook specifically, but you could use that for Google if you're running YouTube ads or display anything that may not result in a click. So honestly, we look at Facebook attribution, in addition to what we're seeing overall. With our clients specifically, a lot of it is not like brand building, just because of the nature of our clients. So most of our the goal is to get them to the site where we're not running like a ton of video ads, but to that point of how do you handle view attribution, just kind of echoing my original comment would be, looking at the modeling that's available in that platform specifically, and just trying to, marry that data with the people who are the data of people who are actually coming from Facebook, to try to understand that holistic picture. But again, being comfortable with there are going to be gaps, and you're never going to understand one-to-one that customer specifically. I'd be more focused on what in general is moving the needle and where can we focus our efforts there, because there's always going to be those gaps.
And then not Facebook, but now let's talk about Amazon for a second, right? What's interesting about Amazon is that all the activity happens on the Amazon website. And so if you want to bring that into your understanding, you have to use their attribution product, which is, I believe, still in beta. Have any of you worked with Amazon? And how do you think about, plugging in those pieces that might not fit into Google Analytics 4 or many of the other measurement packages?
I personally have not used it, but sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I'll try to answer it in the way that I think we should, or we are going from simple to more complex. And I think if you try to draw a big map of the things you should do, it would be so complex that you couldn't even solve it. So we just try to solve it from the little pieces we can do. Like we start with Google Analytics data quality, getting our channels right, and then defining a simple model that is slightly better than a rule-based model. And then getting the, let's say, the tracking source gaps right by solving that, but just taking it very simple. And I think this doesn't answer the question, but it points to another recommendation that I think before you go too much into attribution, you should focus more on like your measurement data quality to get an established process of how do you find your channels, get your channel traffic quality right. So you have an analyst on board, a web analyst, and possibly a data engineer. And I personally wouldn't, in my agency times, I didn't go into attribution because there was so much to do with data quality and automation. It's basically PPC automation. I think it's part of a maturity model where you need to work on like data quality and analytics first before you can go to attribution. And I would always invest more time, if data quality is not right, I would always invest more time in that area before I go into attribution, because you can't do attribution on
bad data,
faulty data, bad data. Yeah. And I wouldn't say missing data, but you always have missing data to a certain extent. But if it's just bad data, you can't do proper attribution modeling.
Yeah, wise words. All right, so we're getting pretty close to the top of the next hour here. So I'll have all of you maybe weigh in on something you think we should have talked about, but we didn't. Or just tell us what are some great places to learn more that you learn from, or where we can learn more directly from you. Whoever.
I would. I would post.
No, Chris, there you go.
So one thing we did mention shortly was that GA4 offers the export for raw data. That's something that I don't think you can do proper attribution, like build your own attribution model without raw data. And you can just activate the raw data, export to BigQuery. And I just posted a link on doing your own session modeling in GA4. So that's just something I would recommend to play around with, because now you have the raw data at hand. You can do all kinds of interesting things, learn SQL, play around with the raw data, and it will take you from there. It typically takes you into Medium. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Medium. It's absolutely addictive. It's a tech hub, and you'll find, I don't know, like 100 different articles on how to do attribution modeling in Python and R, etc. But I would start with the data you have in BigQuery, play around with it, use SQL, and then gradually take it from there.
Nice. What about you, Ken?
Yeah, so I guess I have a bit of a selfish promotion. I have a blog, and I have a section on there about using BigQuery with Data Studio and GA4. So it sort of pairs nicely, I think, with what Chris was talking about. I'm a big believer in getting comfortable with SQL as something that just marketers should be doing more of. It's not the level of effort, the learning curve for working with raw data generally speaking, is not that high. Google makes it a little tricky because they have a funny schema, but I write a lot about that on the blog, and I think hopefully people can find that useful. So that's one. The other thing that I would say, there are a couple of people, if you use Twitter or the Measure Slack, you should check out. Measure Slack, I don't know if is something that this group would know about. You can go to measure.chat. You can sign up there, and it's a huge community of people who work in analytics and BI, basically, and they help each other solve problems. So I definitely recommend it. It's well curated, so people don't come in there and try and sell products. It's just a good group of people helping each other. Also, I would say on Twitter, Charles Farina, Julius Fedorovic from Analytics Mania, those guys are always on top of, here are like new things going on in the industry, and I find them very useful. I'm not great at Twitter myself. I would say 90, maybe 60% of what I do is keep up with those two guys. And so I would throw those out there as my recs.
Great, thanks for those. Brooke, what about you?
Honestly, I'm going to go back to the basics of, if there are people listening who are not necessarily in the implementation space, but if you're still just trying to figure out which of the attribution models would be best for you, or even understanding the benefits of each of them, making sure you are doing your own due diligence and researching those. And me personally, as I'm getting more in depth with GA4, it's another conversation that I want to brush up on before having those conversations with clients, as I tend to really want to get in the weeds. So I'm going through the Google developers tools just to really understand how everything works. So that's me personally, the research that I'm doing. So I have a better understanding of how to speak to clients that way. So I'm kind of on the other side from a marketing standpoint, and trying to understand it in more layman's terms, so I can be communicating that to clients who rely on us to either make these recommendations or to kind of get the ball rolling. So if you're just new to it in general, just making sure you're doing your research on each of the models. If there's custom ones that are available, like Chris was talking about building, and then just utilizing. I mean, there's so many blog articles out there, so making sure you're finding a relevant one. I'll plug Ken's that I look forward to reading in the future. But me personally, I'm just in the actual developer guide right now, just trying to get as familiar as I can with it.
I love the developer guides as well. Great advice. Okay, well, Brooke, Ken, Chris, thank you so much. This has been fantastic advice. Some really good things that I hope people will take action on. And some of it is complicated, but it sounds like if you want to invest time in it, it is worth the effort. So thank you, everyone, for watching another episode of PPC Town Hall. We'll be back with 2 episodes in March, and we'll be talking about reporting, competitive analysis, as well as bid management. So look out for the notification emails on that, and it'll be on March 10th and 24th. So thanks for watching. Have a great Wednesday. Bye.